Welcome back, everyone, to the Halls of History. I am your host, Scott Hall. Ready for the answer to the first trivia question and to see how I can really jump down the rabbit hole when I am not quite looking for anything specific. Okay, so if you remember the question from yesterday, former running back Darrin Nelson attempted and completed one pass in his 12-season NFL career. Nelson, right up there above my right shoulder. Now, who caught that one and only pass? The answer, wide receiver Anthony Carter. November 24th, 1991, the Minnesota Vikings were home against the Detroit Lions. Barry Sanders scored a touchdown in the first quarter that gave Detroit a 7-0 lead. The Vikings finally tied it up at 7-7 in the second quarter when Darrin Nelson found Anthony Carter for a 25-yard touchdown on the halfback option. Now, unfortunately for Minnesota, it was all Lions from there. Kicker Eddie Murray hit a 37-yard field goal before halftime to give Detroit back the lead. And then Sanders went off in the second half, as of course only Sanders could. He scored 3 more rushing touchdowns, including a 45-yard run in the third. The Lions won 34-14. Now, before I get to show you my trail of thought and how I came across this obscure tidbit, I have to talk a little bit more about this game as well as the players. Now, with the win, Detroit improved to 8-4, and it was part of a 6-game win streak. I know some Lions fans are thinking, really, that happened? Yes, and it ended the regular season on the way to a 12-4 record. They then defeated the Dallas Cowboys 38-6 in the divisional playoffs before getting dismantled by Washington 41-10 in the NFC title game. Then, of course, Washington went on to win the Super Bowl. Now, Darrin Nelson completed his one pass and had 4 catches for 38 yards. He also had 1 carry for 29 yards. Now, Anthony Carter finished with 2 catches for 35 yards and the 1 score. Now, on the other side of the ball, Detroit's defense picked off Rich Gannon 3 times and tallied 6 sacks. As for Barry Sanders, well, this ended up being a career day for him. His 4 rushing touchdowns, that was a career high. And his 220 yards on the ground, that was a career best until he ran out 237 on Tampa Bay in 1994. Now, Nelson, in that 12-season career in the NFL, he spent 10 with Minnesota and then 2 with the San Diego Chargers. He was drafted by the Vikings in 1982 as a first-round pick, 7th overall out of Stanford, which that will come into play when I go through my process. In 1989, Nelson went through a contract holdout and lost his starting job to DJ Dozier. So in October, Nelson was traded to the Dallas Cowboys as part of that famed Herschel Walker deal. So many players and draft picks went to the Cowboys. Now, Nelson refused to report to Dallas, which at the time was going through a miserable season under first-year head coach Jimmy Johnson, in which they ended up finishing 1-15 that year. And of course, a few years later, we see what happened. So instead, Nelson was dealt to the San Diego Chargers for a 5th-round draft choice that was used on receiver Reggie Thornton, who did not play for the Chargers, but he did catch a pass in 1991 with the Colts. Well, Nelson was now a 3rd-string running back on the West Coast behind Marion Butts and Tim Spencer. In 1990, again with San Diego, he was used even less on offense as now a 4th-string back. He returned to Minnesota as a free agent, backing up Walker and Terry Allen, while also returning some kickoffs. Now, the all-purpose back finished his career with 1,020 carries for 4,442 yards and 18 rushing touchdowns, caught 286 passes for 2,559 yards and 5 scores. Nelson also returned 163 kickoffs for 3,659 yards, as well as 42 punts for 357 yards. He did not take one back to the house. The other player in this, Anthony Carter, was originally drafted by the Miami Dolphins in the 12th round, 334th overall in 1983 after a record-breaking career at Michigan. He instead chose to go to the upstart USFL, where he starred for the Michigan Panthers for 2 seasons and then the Oakland Invaders for 1 year. Now, as a rookie, Carter torched defensive backs in the new league, averaging nearly 20 yards a catch and gaining almost 1,200 yards and scoring 9 touchdowns. He broke his arm in 1984, and that cut his season short, But then he came back in 1985 with 70 receptions for over 1,300 yards and 14 scores. When the league folded, Carter totaled 160 catches for over 3,000 yards, averaging 19 yards a catch and 27 touchdowns. Now from there, Carter did sign with the Dolphins in 1985. So obviously, they still held his rights from the draft. But then he was traded to Minnesota before ever suiting up for Miami. On from that point, Carter enjoyed an excellent career as the 5'11" and just under 170-pound receiver ran through NFL defenses again, just as he did in the USFL. He played 11 seasons in the National Football League, 9 with the Vikings, 2 with the Lions, and in his first season in 1985, Carter had 5 100-yard games, averaged over 19 yards a catch. He finished his career 22 100-yard games. However, he had one game in the playoffs. He didn't reach the end zone, but he was a major reason why the Vikings came out on top. In the 1987 playoffs, in the divisional round, the Vikings were in San Francisco. The 49ers had the best record in the league. They were first in scoring offense, third in scoring defense. Carter, and it was just his second NFL playoff appearance, he made several clutch catches to keep Minnesota drives alive, leading to a 36-24 victory. Even years later, 49ers players would recall that it seemed like every time they turned around, Anthony Carter was going up and making another ridiculous catch in a key situation, just gaining first down after first down. He ended the game with 10 catches for a playoff record 227 yards. Now that broke the old playoff mark of 198 held by Hall of Famer Tom Fears, set all the way back in 1950. Carter's record has been broken by just one player. Stay tuned to the Halls of History, as that will be a future episode. And Minnesota moved on to the NFC Championship, falling to the Doug Williams-led Washington squad on its way to the Super Bowl. Now, after all of that, I know you're still thinking, how in the world did you end up looking at Darrin Nelson's one and only pass attempt and a completion of his career? Well, here we go. Let's see if you can follow me on this one. So one night I was watching the NFL film series, A Football Life. It's a great series. I absolutely love it. If you haven't seen any episodes yet, you really need to go and check it out. NFL Film's another great job. But I was watching the episode about Dwight Clark. After the episode was over, got on the computer and I pulled up Clark's stats on ProFootballReference.com, and I noticed that he led the NFL in receptions with 60 in 1982. Now that may not sound like a lot, but there was a player strike that season that they did not use replacement players for like they did in 87, and canceled weeks 3 through 10. So 7 games got eliminated from the schedule. So from there, I clicked on the 1982 season, then the receiving leaders list. And as I'm scrolling through the names, I catch James Lofton, one of the best receivers of all time, as a member of the Pro Football Hall of Fame in class of 2003. Now, as I'm looking at Lofton's profile, I thought, hey, I wonder what Lofton's college numbers at Stanford were. And of course, ProFootballReference.com has that. So I clicked there next. Lofton had a great season in 1977, his final year at Stanford, with 53 catches, 931 yards, and 12 touchdowns. So from there, again, keep following me here, I was curious to see who else he played with at Stanford in 77 that may have gone on to the NFL, and that is when I saw Darrin Nelson, who was just a freshman that season. Nelson had 3 1,000-yard rushing seasons, including his senior year in 1981, and scored 11 touchdowns that year. That same season, he also added 67 catches for over 800 yards and 5 scores. Now, another little connection is that in 1977, when Nelson was playing with James Lofton, Stanford finished 9-3 and earned a victory in the Sun Bowl under head coach Bill Walsh, who later drafted Dwight Clark and was the coach of the Niners when Anthony Carter had his big game in the playoffs. Nelson also played in that divisional round matchup and totaled 115 all-purpose yards on 15 touches. But then I clicked on Darrin Nelson's NFL page, saw that he had just one pass that was a completion, clicked on the box score for the game, And there it was, completed to Anthony Carter. So now, like I said, sometimes, especially if I'm looking for not something really definite, like researching players that had 200 yards receiving in a game, that will be the next trivia question and episode. I can really just go all over the map, and it can be a lot of fun. I never know what I may end up coming across. Tune in tomorrow for another trivia question about 200-yard receivers, as this one will be about one of the greatest players of all time. And you can find that right here, only on the Halls of History. Thanks for watching.